Welcome to today's live leadership Q&A event featuring Richard Perry, the founder of Veritus Group. I'm Jeff Schreifels, principal at Veritus Group, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation. But before we get started, I want to make sure you know how to use our webinar system. Because of the number of you with us today, we aren't able to take your questions out loud, but your questions are really important. So please put them in the Q&A box as we go along, because I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A along with listening for Richard, all this stuff. So make it easy for me and put in the Q&A, not the chat, if possible. And just so you know, we'll be sending you a link to recording of this event by tomorrow. So that's the game plan here. So, all right. To kick things off, Richard, let's talk about some of the big themes we're hearing from leaders in the sector right now.
Yeah.
Why don't you start talking about some of the big ones?
Yeah. So, I mean, to start off with, there's all kinds of economic jitters and budget concerns and things about revenue. And this is touching people. I mean, in various, I mean, we hear that from Australia, from the UK, Europe, as well as the United States and Canada. So lots of concerns about budget and what's going on, and donors. And of course, here in the United States, because I'm aware of the fact that we've got, I think, 3 or 4 people from outside the United States, from Australia, and I think Mexico and Canada and somewhere else. Can't remember where, but there was a study done that showed that giving for the first time in a long time had dropped down, dropped by what, 2, 3, 4% or something like that.
Major gifts giving. Yeah.
Well, giving in general, I think.
Well, giving in general, but you're right. First time though that we saw not just giving in general, because that's been a couple of years, but it's been from major donors as well and mid-level. I saw for the first time those going down.
Now, we have an opinion about that, but we're going to get into on that, because actually we don't think it ought to be going that way, and that there's things you can do about it. But economic concerns, and of course you've got all of these wars going on and this trouble and all this stuff, which causes concern in the economy. So budget concerns is a big one. Another one is staffing and hiring issues, getting the right people.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting on that one. That's been in the major gift and mid-level, I mean, probably across the board has been a concern for a number of different people. So those are the 2 big issues. I think I'd probably add another one, Jeff, and that's the whole business of donor and value retention. I mean, we have been living over all these years with just tremendous fallout of donors. And in our analysis that we created 15, 20 years ago, the value attrition thing, we've seen, that the same donors just give less if they're not managed properly, and a tremendous amount less.
Yes.
So all of this is symptomatic of problems in the sector.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about some of those. Now, also, you've been doing some work on how organizations can organize themselves to support the donor journey. That major gift pipeline, as some people call it as well. So, can you speak to why there's such a big focus for us and what the organizations need to be looking at right now about that?
Yeah, this has come out of, I mean, you and I have been doing this for, I mean, you've got 35, 36 years, and I've been doing it for 42, 43 years.
Yeah.
And I remember in our early years, Jeff, we'd get into all these details and all this stuff, and you'd produce these plans, these organizational plans that were 60 pages and, and all this stuff. And what's dawned on me is that we've just moved away as a sector and as leaders and managers from focusing on what the main thing is.
Yeah.
And the main thing is getting donors, keeping donors,
Yeah.
and upgrading donors. And I've reviewed so many plans of large organizations and small organizations throughout the years, and in different countries and different cultures, and they tend to get way detailed and out of focus in terms of all this other stuff that needs to be done. And some of the favorite things are public relations, communications, marketing, brand enhancement, advocacy,
Yeah.
public education, all that kind of thing. All of which are legitimate things to do, but they've gotten kind of out of perspective, in my opinion. And so we move away from the whole donor acquisition, donor retention, donor upgrading thing.
Yeah. I think that's so true. It's like we try to overcomplicate things, and then we don't realize, okay, especially during times like this, when everything is like, the economy, people are unsure of that. You're talking about the budget being tighter and everything. Now's the time to focus on the simple things. Acquire donors, retain donors, upgrade donors, take care of your donors. Those are the lifeblood of your organization.
They really are. And
everything else to me is nice, but that is core.
Well, we do have some recent examples of money being spent in other areas than those three buckets that you just talked about: donor acquisition, donor retention, and upgrading. I mean, like a small organization that spends $3 million doing those other things while they're starving for new donors and major donors. I think we've just gotten out of focus on that. So that's a big concern for us. And I've developed over the last year, and you and I've worked on some of this together, kind of a checklist of, okay, what should you look at in your organization to make sure that you're actually focused properly?
Yes.
And we can go through some of that whenever you're ready to. I noticed there's some questions in there.
Yeah. So we're starting to get some questions in, and just a reminder to everyone on the Zoom call here, please put in your questions in the Q&A box. We're starting to see some coming in. Would love to get to all of your questions, and Richard would be happy to answer them. So this is a great question. This is around the hiring problem. So Peter asks, fundraisers stay an average of 1.2 years. Why can't we move the needle on that? It's hard to do relational fundraising when organizations don't invest in staff. What are your thoughts on why can't we keep people? Why is it there's such a turn?
Well, I think it has to do with, in some regards, it has to do with pay.
Yeah.
So there's a mentality in a nonprofit world that we ought to just pay people on the cheap.
Right.
And like there's some kind of virtue to doing that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I think the bigger thing is the culture that's been created, unrealistic expectations. I mean, Jeff, how many staff members have we had, both in the direct marketing field or social media field or the major gift mid-level field, plan giving, who complain to us privately about authority figures saying, "Oh, you've got to raise," and they just come up with some number.
Yeah.
You've got to just raise this for next year, and there's no basis whatsoever, no basis for that thing, and of course the person fails,
right?
Because there's no basis.
Right.
And how discouraging. Why would you want to stay in a job where you're constantly faced with failure or constantly faced with expectations that are unreasonable? I mean, you and I, when we do budgets for the clients that we have, we start with the donors.
Right.
And what kind of and what their ability to give is, and we move from that and then project out, what the forecast is going to be, including the new donors that are coming in.
Right.
It seems to me that's the only way to do it, but surprisingly, most organizations do not do it that way. So I think those are the two big reasons.
I mean, another one would be around, I mean, most people don't leave organizations because they don't love the mission or the money. It's because they have a bad manager.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes, and so bad management is the number one reasons people leave. And what you just said about the budget is bad management,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so get that piece figured out. I mean, that's what we've learned. This is what we do, right? At
Mm-hmm.
Veritus, this is what we figured out. Like, this is when we looked at, Richard, when you first looked at, okay, besides having the structure right and how to set up a proper major gift program, then the next part of this whole thing is, well, you also have to hold people accountable to execute the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And no one was doing that. And you're just like, this is why it's so important that you're constantly providing that ongoing management to your frontline fundraising staff to help keep them accountable, give them good strategy, encouraging them, because this is such hard work. And if you're not doing that, this is then a 10% increase in pay sounds a lot better, right?
It does.
Even though that's a really dumb reason to leave, but if you have bad management, it's not so bad.
Right. Well, setting the proper goals and creating an environment where they're attainable and there's logic behind the forecast. Logic, not emotions.
Yeah.
Not desire, not some vision that somebody's kind of come up with that they think is great, but there's logic behind it that has to do with donors, and which by the way, this is such a simple concept. The source of money is donors.
Yeah.
Donors, institutional donors, individual donors. That's where the money comes from. So you start there. So setting appropriate goals and creating a logical, realistic plan is so important.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question from Christy. She's asking, for small organizations without a dedicated fundraising or development staff, what is your advice for executive directors on how to best spend their time when it comes to donor prospecting, relationship building, especially when your board isn't helpful in this area?
Well, first of all, on the word prospecting, Christy, I would be looking at making sure that you're looking for donors in your donor pool. In other words, you should have a whole system to get donors that's operating separate from the executive director. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, because you should reserve the executive director's time for people that are already in the house that love you and are wanting to give to you. That's where that time should be spent. And then the idea is basically going with talking to those donors who are in the house, have shown by their recency of giving and the amount of giving and the frequency of giving that they are the most interested in your organization. Those are the donors that the executive director should be spending their time with.
Yes.
Not all that other stuff.
Exactly. Good stuff. Just a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A. Some of you are using the chat. I'm only doing that for practical reasons so that I can keep track of everything, because I'm the only one running this thing. So be kind to me, and you type your questions into the Q&A. Okay, here's a question from Jonathan. We are a small nonprofit just sniffing the $1 million mark, okay? How do small NGOs like us creatively make the leap to hiring an MGO when we don't already have 1 to 2 years of pay saved up for this person? In addition, I find the lack of creative variable pay models out there for MGOs. Any help there?
Well, I tell you what I would do, Jonathan, is find a donor that
Yes.
That just loves you and has kind of a business mind that looks at investments.
Yep.
And produce produce a plan for that donor, a 2-year plan, where the donor funds that position.
That's right.
We've done that a number of times, and that works really well. But you've got to show, here's the cost structure, here's what you're going to spend the money on. And by the way, it should be salary and operational costs, not just compensation.
Right.
And then you show how that progresses into and turns into a positive cash flow and a positive situation. That's a really good investment for a donor that understands how everything works to make. A very good investment. There might be some foundations that would be interested in capacity building, or we've seen that too. The other thing that I would suggest is take a look at your budget and find areas where you're spending money on all those other things.
Yeah.
And grab some money from there. I mean, there's a lot of room in a lot of budgets, even if the budgets are small, where if you just spent it differently with a focus on donor acquisition.
Yep.
And donor care, you'd be way ahead versus on a lot of other things.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question from Rachel, who's actually a director of institutional giving. So this is where her focus is. So I know Veritus focused on individual donors, but would you mind speaking about some grants, especially government and foundation nonprofit grants? What are your thoughts on relational fundraising where grants are concerned, like for foundations and such? What are some patterns you see where grants are concerned, that kind of thing?
Well, one negative pattern I see is that in the government and corporate and business space, we treat those people differently than we would just a regular individual donor.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean by that is, and this is so fascinating to me. So, like, take a government grant, and I've gotten a number of those over the years. You think of it as the government,
right?
It's this giant organization that has all these rules and forms and deadlines, and which it does, and you've got to pay attention to it. But behind all those rules and deadlines and everything are, regular human beings that have emotions and wishes and desires. And so treat them like you would a major donor, an individual major donor.
Yes.
So, like, for instance, we had one situation, and this has happened a number of times, where the funder basically says, okay, we're going to give you the grant, but you don't need to report to us except 2 times a year. And I said, you need to report to them every month. Not in an obnoxious, bothersome way, but
right.
Send, hey, Mary, here's I just thought, I know this is irregular, but I just thought I'd just tell you about this thing that's just happening. It's just amazing what's going on here. And you treat the person as if they were themselves the source of the money.
That's right.
I mean, that is how we would do it, and that's how we do it. And it causes retention, and it causes bonding, and it causes loyalty, which means the person that has to manage all the rules and all the bureaucracy and all the stuff leans towards you because they feel an affinity for you and a care for you because you have cultivated them that way.
That's right. Yeah, we've been working with a really large organization who has a number of major gift officers, mid-level officers, and institutional officers as well. And we started working with mid and major, but then the director of institutional giving was basically looking at what the mid and major gift donors were training on, and they were like, I looked at this training. We need to have the same training for our institutional donors, because exactly what you just said is that there's a person behind the institution that's making these decisions.
Well, or it's a personality. So for instance, take a synagogue, a church, a place of worship. let's say that in your organization that you pursue those kind of religious institutions. There's a committee, there's a group, but there's a group think, and there's a way of so you deal with these people as if they were the actual human being, and you're identifying that group's passions and interests, and you're serving those passions and interests.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with them in a personal, intimate, caring, authentic way, like you would an individual.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me how formal we get when it's a organization. We get all formal and stiff and tight, and we mirror all the bureaucracy of the organization instead of being disarming and deal with the organization in a very human and emotional way.
Exactly. One person wanted to kind of piggyback on that a bit. So when you're working with the institutions, who should cultivate them if you don't have an institutional fundraiser? Should it be the MGO? Should it be the executive director, the CDO? And then should you tier those people just like you would major gifts?
I would do the same routine that we always do. And if the organization has a lot of potential and they feel like they're warm towards you and they're interested, you might have someone that has some standing in the organization relate more to them.
Yeah.
Because that is a necessary thing. I mean, as you know, how that all works. But it just depends what labor that you have available to do that work.
What about having, a lot of people have grant writers who are writing these, grants, obviously, but then they're also asking them to kind of hold the relationship too. I mean, that may work, right? If that person is relational, but
Yeah, sometimes a grant writer is not a relational person. They're more of a technical person that gathers program information and produces documents and budgets,
right,
and forms and all that stuff. So you have to be aware of all of that because you do need a relational person doing the relational thing. Now, in that situation, you might have the grant person, if they're more technically oriented, producing the documents, and someone else in the organization presenting them and holding the relationship. Yeah.
Here's a question from Kelly. We are just starting to attract donors who want to give gifts of $50,000 and more. How do you budget for those gifts? Do they get restricted or put into the operating? We have a donor giving up to $50,000 to grow what we're doing in a certain program, yet our senior leadership doesn't want to increase the size of our budget or expenses.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this gets into the whole donor offer thing. And it's basically what we recommend is taking your entire organization's budget, including all the operating expenses, and packaging the whole thing into donor offers.
Yeah.
Some of which will be 25,000, some of which will be 90,000, some might be 150,000. But they include the overhead.
Right.
The whole thing that you're saying there, Kelly, is that this whole restricted thing, which is what Jeff and I and our team were constantly talking about. Well, we've got to worry about this. Well, why do they got to worry? They have to worry about it. They have to worry about it because they have to pay the operational budget.
Right.
Do away with the operational budget by allocating portions of it to program categories.
Right.
Now you're still the finance guys will go nuts on that, but you're going to produce your budget like you normally do.
Yeah.
But when you package the budget, you come up with a different way of presenting those numbers to donors.
Yeah.
Which is actually how the retail commercial environment works. When you buy a candy bar or a pen, all the operational marketing costs, distribution costs, selling costs, everything, all that cost is in the item.
Right.
You don't go to the store down to your Walgreens or CVS or your local grocery store and then go to check out, and the person says that'll be $2 for the pen, and it'll be an extra 75 cents for the
for
operational
R&D
side, for the R&D
or
and the
the
operational
R&D
side
and
of it.
marketing.
But that's what we do in nonprofit work. It's just such an amazing thing to me. It's like we would think they were absolutely crazy. Like, why do we do that? No, the
I
pen
know.
costs $2.75 all in, and I'm a happy man. I just now got myself a new pen,
Right.
and I've left it up to the organization to sort out how much goes into the actual product itself and how much goes over to finance, how much to HR, how much to marketing, sales, R&D, taxes, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we're so afraid to talk about overhead, or we think donors won't support, you know, the overhead budget that's with all of these projects. How many projects, how many times have we seen where organizations write grants for projects and, for like, it's going to cost $300,000. No, it's not 300,000. It's actually $380,000 with the overhead included in this. And that's the only way it's going to run. It's not going to work, unless we have the overhead. And it just
Well, I
happens.
mean, I do agree. I do agree with the senior leadership. Back to Kelly's question that okay, so you've got a program going, and the program with overhead costs $75,000, and you've decided programmatically that you do not want to spend more than that on that program.
Mm-hmm.
That's the right of the leadership to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So a donor comes in and says, well, I'm going to give you another 75. I want you to do twice as much. And the leadership and the board have decided, no, we don't want to do that. So that is a legitimate concern. Then the task on Kelly's part is to basically persuade the donor to do something else with the 75 that they want to give in addition and above.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say about that other point is that you should start not with what's the donor going to give and then back into the program thing. You should start with the program plus the operational costs and present that to the donor for funding.
Yep.
Do it that way.
Yeah. Okay, here's one from Charles. This is a little around, how do you thank donors, right? So when you have just a few donors, is it a good idea to give small thank you gifts?
No. The reason is what the donor actually needs and wants is to know that their gift made a difference.
Absolutely.
Spend your time and money helping the donor understand that their giving made a difference. That's what touches the heart. That's what's meaningful. Not gifts. The donors will actually interpret the gift giving as a misuse of money, of the organization's money, in my opinion.
Yep. Here's one. How do you work with a CEO who doesn't want to participate in donor meetings?
You change them. So that is.
You mean change them out or change their heart?
No, change them. Get a new CEO. This is really interesting to me because we're in the midst of in one situation getting a new CEO, helping getting a new CEO into the organization. All right. Now we're back to this original point we started off with, which is this.
Yeah.
What is a nonprofit doing? What's the reason for their existence? A nonprofit's reason for their existence is they're addressing a societal problem, right?
Yeah.
Could be conservation, could be health, could be
everything.
And anything.
We got a lot of problems to solve.
There's a lot of problems on this planet to solve. Okay. So if that's what the organizations exist to do, to solve a societal problem, then what's the main thing to do that? It's to find the resources to solve that problem.
That's right.
So why would you hire somebody? Why would you hire somebody to lead the organization that A, doesn't understand that, and B, is not committed to that? You shouldn't. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. So I was sort of joking about trading the CEO out, but it's like the main thing is to basically deal with the sources of the revenue, and the main thing is the program.
Yeah.
The main thing is the program and its delivery.
Right.
And then the supporting main thing is getting the resources. So now, to be fair and kind, because we need to be practical about this. So, okay, so we don't have someone like that in the organization. What do we do?
Right.
Well, then we find some other executives that are in the organization that have a heart for donors, that are relational, that are motivated, and we enlist their help. The other thing is to examine, does the CEO have a wrong philosophy or a wrong view of money?
Right.
Because that might also be the problem. So then because we've dealt with that before too, it's like you change the view the authority figure has about money, that it's not actually taking something from a donor, but it's that the act of fundraising is not taking something from a donor, but it's actually giving the donor the opportunity to solve a problem that they deeply care about.
Yeah.
And when the person can be convinced about that, that turns out to be a very positive transformation in terms of how the authority figure thinks.
Yeah. Okay. We're still getting some good questions in. If you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A. This is your time to ask anything. So here's one that's come in. What advice would you offer for leaders working in an organization where it's time for the founder to pass leadership on, but they're resisting to doing so? What do you do there?
Oh, that's a hot potato, isn't it? We've been around this block as well. This is a very sad situation to me, and I am a founder, and I have actually followed the advice I'm going to give. I've passed the whole thing off to Jeff. I have no legal authority whatsoever in Veritus, none. So he could do whatever he wants, and I could be mad as everything, and I couldn't do a thing about it. I mean, that's what founders should do. They need to get out sooner than later. Now, I was helped in that line of thinking by observing all the founders that didn't get out, and I have a real heart for them, because they haven't sorted out some of the things that I've been able to sort out, and that's that it's hard to get out if you don't have a plan to get out and have some purposeness beyond the thing that you started. And so helping those founders get that purpose, that purposeful thing that they can do, and do it in a kind and gentle way is what's needed. So a lot of these founders are just basically afraid. And they would never say that, but they stick around because they're afraid, and so it becomes a problem. Very sad and very complex situation. If anybody on this call has a situation like that you think that I personally could be helpful with, I'd be glad to do that. I've got personal experience down that line.
You definitely do. Okay, here's one. My organization has decided to merge the communications and the fundraising departments and let go of the head of fundraising and the head of communications to replace with one new head of the merged department that will start recruitment this month. Any tips or recommendations for how to move forward in this situation?
Hire a fundraiser to head it up.
Oh, yeah.
Not a communications person.
I mean, how many times have we seen that happen?
Yeah. So here's why we say that we're not against communications, but we don't believe that it works effectively and efficiently and economically to have a non-fundraiser at the top of that whole cluster of people and functions.
Yeah.
So in our opinion, marketing and communications, public relations, all of that should be subordinate to the fundraising agenda.
Yeah.
Now that, if you're a marketing person listening to me right now, you're probably upset. And I understand that, but there's a logic to it. It's not that we hate marketing or dislike communications or anything like that. It's because the main thing is to acquire donors, retain donors, and upgrade donors, and you use marketing and communications and public relations to do that.
Yeah.
That's a supportive function. When you have it at equal authority, it just doesn't work. It never works. It doesn't.
Yeah. Okay, here's one from Jennifer. What should the board's role be in fundraising and building donor relationships? As much as we ask them to introduce us to their networks, it just doesn't happen. Our board development committee tends to only focus on our special events and not the big picture topics. This is a common one we get, right, Richard?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I would probably go to an individual on the board and work with them individually and say, would you introduce me to a couple of your friends? Let's go out to lunch. Somebody that thinks like you do. In other words, don't do it as a group. Because that whole group thing doesn't seem to work when you say, now, listen, we want you all to introduce the organization to your network. And of course, nobody's going to respond. So approach them personally, one-on-one.
Yeah.
And see how that works.
I agree with that. Did you add to that?
Well, I was just going to say then the second thing is then what that board member could do. Let's say a board member then introduces you to two people and one of them becomes a donor. Have the board member manage that relationship.
Yep.
You just don't ask them. Don't ask them to show to give you your whole book, their whole contact thing. I mean, I wouldn't give you mine either.
Yeah.
But I might introduce you to two or three.
Right.
And say, and I might bring them to a lunch where we all sit down and talk about stuff. So that's the other thing. Just the language, introduce us to your network.
Yeah.
Implies I'm going to open my address book to you. Well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
But if I'm asked for one or two, and you put a little pressure on me.
Yeah.
I might do it.
Yep. So I have one story that I felt like this is really good because I got to work on this many years ago with a nonprofit. And this nonprofit wanted to raise they had a president that was outgoing, leaving. And this person had been in the organization for 40 plus years. So they wanted to have kind of this like campaign to kind of celebrate this person and to raise money from. And they wanted to raise like an extra $150,000. And so they were going to the board to say, could you help us raise this and, get out there? Well, they had 20 board members. And what they said was, look, not all of you are interested in talking to your friends and to ask for money. Great. How many would be willing to do that of the 20? 6 raised their hand. Okay. So they had 6 people that said, yes, I will go out to my sphere of influence and ask for extra funds for this particular thing. Then they asked me and the development director could you treat these 6 people just like you would a major gift officer and hold them accountable to their plan that they want to have for their donors? So they all had their own little spreadsheets, Richard, with their donors. And we met every week for like 8 weeks in a row for this campaign, little mini campaign, where they had their donors and all the board members, that those 6 board members all got on the call, and we went through their donors and talked about strategy, and they loved it. The board loved it because these were 6 people that said, raised their hand first. So they were wanting to do it. And then we held them accountable. And they said, we loved it because you told us what we needed to do. So many board members are wanting to do stuff, but no one's at telling them how to do it. And so there's a responsibility from the nonprofit side to train these board members, to get the board members to do stuff and hold them accountable to it. And when usually the board, nonprofits are saying, well, the board doesn't do anything. They always say they're going to do something. They never do it. It's because we just say, hey, could you go out and raise some money? We don't give them the tools they need and the follow-up to actually do it.
Well, and some boards should be organized along the lines of the skill set of the board member. So don't necessarily ask an HR person, board member that comes from an HR background, to do fundraising. Maybe they should be the consultant for the HR function in the organization. In other words, align the skill set to the function.
Here's a question from Melissa. How would you structure your ideal development team of a moderate-sized agency serving an entire state? As in, would it include a VP, a couple of NGOs, support staff, grants, writer, et cetera? What? How would you structure that?
Well, here's the way I would think about it, Melissa, is just zero-base the whole thing and think in terms of acquisition of donors, retention of donors, and upgrading of donors.
Yeah.
Who's going to do these functions? Who's going to acquire donors in the state? Think about that, organize that, because you've got to have that whole thing going, the acquisition thing. Once the donor comes in, how are we going to manage those donors, and who's going to manage them? And then that involves a whole thing related to probably social media and direct mail or some kind of thing, depending on your size. There's that whole cultivation thing from which the mid-level major gift thing happens. And out of that, you would then hire your major gift officers, your mid-level officers, and then settle all that down and then go to the support staff related to that.
Yeah.
If there are grant sources in the state, which there likely are, then you would measure that and you'd add that as well. But the thing to discipline your thinking is acquisition, cultivation, and retention and upgrading. How am I going to get that done? That should tell you how you should hire and staff things.
Yeah. And then, I would tell Melissa, your data, the number of donors and how much they're giving and where they are in the donor pipeline will tell you how many mid-level people you need, how many MGOs you need. Your data tells you how many you need, right? I mean, so like we know if your major gift threshold, Melissa, is 5,000 and above, donors are giving, if you've got 450 donors that are giving 5,000 and above, you have enough donors for one major gift officer. Because what? Because we know that only a third of them will actually qualify. And that's 150 donors for a full-time major gift officer. So your data will help you tell you how many staff for mid and major and plan giving you would need.
Yeah, but the rest of the organization, you need to be thinking of those functions. So start with the functions. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, here's a question. What's the best way to structure a weekly development team meeting? What are the key things to talk about every week? What are your best practices? This is for major gift officers and their support staff.
I'd probably be talking about, okay, I think you're meeting with, if it's major gift and their support staff, I'd be meeting individually with the major gift officers
Definitely.
uh, to talk about the progress against goal and any situations they're facing with donors.
Right.
I think the development team meeting, now, why are we having a development team meeting? We're having it probably to talk about donor offers. And we're probably meeting to talk about impact. So we have information about what to give back to donors. But here's the thing on that question is the individual work has to do with the authority figure or the manager and the major gift officer and the plan giving officer and so on. That goes that way. The team thing has to do with the overall program offers that we're giving to donors and how we can get more, and then what kind of impact we're having so that we can report back to them.
Yeah.
Probably the other thing related to team is just basically esprit de corps, helping people be encouraged about the good work that's being done, problems are being solved, etc. But other than that, I don't see the purpose for the development team meeting weekly.
Yeah. Maybe not weekly, maybe monthly would be more. If you're meeting weekly one-on-one, then maybe like a monthly development team meeting would be more
Or
appropriate.
bi-monthly, yeah.
Yeah. But
Be
like,
careful you're not doing technical management work in the meeting, in the broader meeting. That's not appropriate. You should just deal with the individual NGO.
Yeah. In those team meetings, some of the things we've heard from clients that are really effective for them is what you were kind of alluding to. You're talking about the impact. So you're telling stories about what's happening in the field because you want to help, you want to essentially break the heart of your staff people, right? Talking about what's the end result of the mission so that you can relay those to donors. And then also
so you could relay it to the individual staff person who needs to be encouraged that we're actually doing some good here.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then also talking about donor stories and like I had this donor who was giving 5,000 and I really got to know them and got to understand their passions and interests. And now they're giving 25,000, those kind of things.
That's fun. That's fun to hear those things.
Yeah.
What I don't want to hear in the staff meeting is how far behind we are, and when I can't do a thing about it as an admin or a non-fundraising frontline person.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, here's a question. Can you talk a bit about the relationship of finance and development? I've worked with an organization where finance was involved in directing fundraising efforts.
Oh, that's a special finance person. And actually, that statement is probably a little unfair because it makes an assumption that a finance person can't direct fundraising efforts effectively, because I have seen some that can.
Okay.
But the relationship of finance to development is basically to give information on constructing to help the fundraising people construct donor offers. We're spending this much in X category, and if you allocate this much of overhead to it, then the total spend on that category is this. That's helpful. What's also helpful is what kind of giving is happening towards the category. We've raised this much for this category, right? Etc.
How much is left that we need to raise?
So that would be helpful. I have seen finance people who don't know anything about fundraising, direct fundraising, And then it becomes a whole finance exercise. Well, we're 20% behind and this and that. And it just gets to be a very depressing. I mean, you need to go into therapy after you've had your meeting with with the fund
Yeah.
with the finance person. So you got to
Yep.
be careful with that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I mean, we've seen where finance people in a situation where you're way behind on budget or expense, and they'll say, okay, we got to make a cut 20% across the board without understanding that you can't cut fundraising 20%. You might have to cut program or whatever 20%. But it's across the board rather than thinking about, oh, well, this is actually the engine that fuels this. We don't really want to cut your expenses here, but they just make these random, because they don't understand the function of fundraising. So we're always an advocate, Richard, right? Where you need to really understand who your finance people are. You need to create a relationship so that your director of development is essentially a real partner with your finance director, so that they really understand what you're trying to accomplish with your acquisition efforts and why you're losing money at the point of acquisition.
right.
Because they need to understand the pipeline and how long it takes and why you're doing what you're doing. And that takes time building a relationship with that person.
Well, they not only need to understand it, but they need to actually support it.
Yeah,
Some of the best finance people are people who are advocates for fundraising,
that's right.
not blocks to fundraising. In many situations, we've seen the finance person sees themselves, and they're affirmed by the CEO or the authority figure. They see themselves as the person that is crying foul, and you've got to watch out what you're doing, and we're spending way too much money, and
Yeah,
and blah blah, and it's such a negative environment.
yeah,
Like you were saying about acquisition, Jeff, we all know, anybody on this call, that you lose money in acquisition.
right.
You lose money in the first phase of acquisition. And we've known that for decades, decades and decades.
Yeah,
That's actually how it works. It works in the commercial world that way as well.
right.
You lose money when you acquire a customer, and then you make it up by keeping the customer, treating them right, and filling their needs. A
Exactly.
good finance person understands that and supports it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stuff. Okay, here's one. Would you suggest it's a good idea to pause all acquisition and focus 1 year of the strategic plan on stewardship and cultivation of donors currently in the database?
Absolutely not. You can
Why?
never, ever pause acquisition, ever.
Yeah.
Now we've seen that. We've seen it so many times, Jeff. All right, we're going to cut out the $1 million that's targeted acquisition this year because we just can't afford to do it. And then 2 years from now, when all the retention attrition sets in,
Yep.
and the value attrition and donor attrition, the organization is in a horrible place.
Yes.
In a horrible place. The absolute reality about fundraising is that, and this is true of all commercial business as well, customers or donors, is that you have these donors and customers coming in,
Yep.
and they tend to drop off over time.
Yeah.
At different rates, which means they need to be replenished. You stop replenishing it, you're going to die eventually.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good idea. It's a shortcut that you shouldn't take.
And there's been so many organizations that have made that mistake. I mean, one famous one that most people in the industry know of is American Cancer Society. They several years ago made a decision to stop acquisition. They were losing money. It was a budget thing, so they decided to just cut acquisition and just focus on their donor base. And in that first year, they obviously reduced expenses, but 2 and 3 years later, they were really hurting. And so
Mm.
they had to double up their acquisition efforts because they realized they had to feed the pipeline and they were hurting. So
Yeah, it's sort of, Jeff, like we're driving a car and we're looking at our budget as we're driving and we're saying to ourselves, boy, we just don't have enough money for gas. I mean, so let's
yeah,
just not buy any.
right.
And so now we're actually moving down the road. So we've got
Yeah.
another,
We saved the
110
money by not
miles.
buying the gas.
You save the money, you've got extra cash, but you're dead like in Albuquerque there. Boom, you're gone. Uh, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah,
Can't do it. Feel
yeah,
very strongly about it.
right. Okay, this one's around mid-level. Should mid-level officers be meeting in person with higher tiers of their portfolio, or should this be totally reserved for major gifts only?
Well, I mean,
What do you think?
that's sort of an intuitive thing.
Yeah, I
But
yeah,
but I could see that happening. The operative word is higher tiers,
yep.
higher tiers,
Higher tiers and
higher capacity.
also like, are you a local organization or a regional versus like a national organization? So we often recommend that if you're a local organization, yes, sometimes your mid-level officers on the high A level tier could visit them because they're right in their own community.
Mm-hmm.
On a national scale, we would not recommend that because that's where major gift officers come in.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a major gift officer in Connecticut and you having them work with somebody who's in California, you're probably not sending mid-level people out to do that work.
Right.
Right. Well, that's all our questions today. This has been fun. Wow, that went fast.
Mm-hmm. That's fun.
Some great questions from folks. Any last parting words you want to leave with everyone, Richard?
Well, just take a look at everything you're doing and get back to the points that we started off with. Is your acquisition healthy? Is your cultivation healthy? And are you doing that? And are you retaining donors and upgrading donors? And collapse all your efforts into those big categories of functional categories, and then strip away the other ones or put them in supportive roles.
Yeah.
And I think that'll clean up a lot of what your organization is doing and become more effective and efficient. And we'd be glad to help you with that if you need the help.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us today. And as a reminder, you'll receive a recording of this webinar by tomorrow. And if you have any questions that come up or you want to learn more about how we can support your organization, you can contact us at hello@veritusgroup.com. And a member of our team will get in touch and take care. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Great to
Have
be
a
with
great
you.
day.